Quilting Celebrations with Patrick Lose is brought to you by The Warm Company, manufacturers of the most loved battings and double-stick fusibles for creative people. Janome, what's next? Superior Threads, all your favorite threads. Havel's Sewing, cut it close with Havel's Sewing. And Patrick Lose Studios, designs and inspirations for your quilting celebrations. Hi everyone, we're back in my sewing studio with my friend Kay, and I'm going to teach Kay how to do the bindings the way that I do them, because she says she needs a refresher course, and I kind of don't think she does.
Well, we won't say that you taught me this before, but I do need a refresher course.
Right. So we've got a couple of projects here. We're not going to actually go through making the projects or showing how to make the projects, but one of them is a round placemat and the other one is a square placemat. So the round placemat is going to need a bias cut binding, and we'll do that in the next segment. But in this segment, we want to work on straight grain binding on straight, right angle corners. So the first thing that we do is determine what width of binding we want to use. And I almost always, and I asked Kay before, she's the same as I am, we cut our bindings 2 1/4 inches wide. A lot of people cut 2 1/2 inches wide, and I understand that, and everybody has their own way of doing things. But there is a sort of a technical reason that I do 2 1/4 inch bindings, because I use warm and natural cotton batting. And it is a low loft batting, and so I find that if I cut it any wider than that and try to sew it on with a 1/4 inch seam around the edge, when I fold the binding to the back, there's way too much overlap, and it doesn't match the front. So really that's my main reason for using 2 1/4 inch wide cuts, is that it's going to bind the quilt better with the thickness of batting that I'm working with.
My grandma always said it needed to be stuffed.
That's right, all the way to the folded edge of the binding.
Needed to be stuffed all the way around.
Exactly. So what we'll do is we've already cut 2 1/4 inch wide strips, and I'm just going to show you real quickly. I mean, we're going to assume that you already know how to do bindings, and you're just wanting to sort of perfect your technique here. So what we do is we put, and actually, Kay, I
extra?
Yeah, I just throw it like that. And then I don't usually draw the seam, the 45-degree angle seam, because I can eyeball it. I'm sure you guys can too, but we'll draw it on here just so that you see which direction we're sewing.
Can you see that?
Sure.
Okay, great.
I could probably see it even without the chalk, the
I think
tracing
so.
wheel. And those of you who know me know that I don't use pins on just about anything, so I'm not going to use any pins here. And I'm just going to remove that seam guide, and I'm just going to start at that corner, and I'm going to remove my hand there so that you can see what's going on. And I'm just going to stitch that straight line from corner to corner.
What stitch length do you like for that?
2.5 maybe. Okay, now we have that, and I'm just going to now cut a 1/4 inch.
May I do half of it?
Sure.
Pretty please.
You like these scissors,
I like
don't
these
you?
scissors
You know
a
what?
lot.
I love these scissors too, just because of the finger holes in them are large enough for me. Havel's scissors are just awesome.
They're awesome. They make cutting so fun.
I love the way that the serrated edge grabs the fabric.
It doesn't
makes
move
it much
at all.
more accurate cut.
Thank you.
Definitely. And so then we'll just press this seam allowance open, and we've already got that done, so we don't need to actually show that. And here's where the way that I do binding is a little bit different from other people, and I think it's why I get requests all the time to show this, is because of how I treat my binding corners. And
that's what I need a refresher on.
Yeah, and I can really show you a way to make these binding corners less lumpy and more accurate. So because I am sewing the binding on, even though I've cut it 2 1/4 inches, I'm still going to sew it on a little wider than 1/4 inch.
Oh, okay.
Because you can see that this is quilted densely. This, this meander is fairly dense, so it's matted down the batting even more. So it's a very thin batting, almost like flannel, if you've ever used flannel for a batting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my seam allowance, and I have this great little thing here, this seam guide. Not all machines have that, and it's not necessary to have, but it sure makes it easier for me.
I think it would be great.
Yeah, it's awesome. So what I do is here, if I were to set this right up to the presser foot, you would see that that's going to be a 1/4 inch seam. But I want to set that out just a little bit. It's almost 3/8, but not quite that I stitch it at, and I'm going to just fasten the seam
So it's going to
guide.
be kind of the opposite of when we're piecing and we do a scant.
Yeah,
We're going to do a little more.
Yeah, just a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. And you know, another thing that I often do, and I want to show this, you've got a seam in your binding. This one isn't so bad because I'm only going to have one seam, and it's right there. But I do kind of run the binding around the piece and just sort of guesstimate where that seam is going to fall.
That's
Because
a great idea.
if I don't do it, invariably
Yep.
the seam is going to end up right on a corner. And it just about did there, but I think we're going to be good. So I'm just going to start a little bit higher.
And you like to start on the side of your piece?
I'm just
Or
doing
doesn't
it
it
for this,
matter?
but it doesn't really matter. If you do your seams well, they're not going to be visible anyway. But I usually do start on the bottom or on the right, or left side, I'm sorry, rather than the right. But for this one, it's just going to be easier for me to start here. And I'm going to leave a tail, so I'm going to start.
And no pins, I love it.
Well, no, it's just not, I don't feel it's necessary, and they also get in the way when we're trying to, film this to show you. So
Well, they would get in the way with
seam
your guide,
especially,
yeah.
Definitely. So I'm just going to start stitching down one side. And you can see that I can just run the edge of it right along that seam guide, and it just keeps me from making too big of a misjudgment in the width of the seam allowance. I do have to loosen the seam guide and turn. I'm going to pivot the piece when I get to the corner. The distance that I'm sewing from the edge, the seam allowance, which is almost 3/8 of an inch, that's how far I need to stop from the next corner, is that same distance, just like any other straight grain binding you're doing. Then I'm going to pivot, so I lift my presser foot and pivot 45 degrees, and I'm going to stitch straight through that corner.
Oh, to the point.
Right, and do not
Okay.
backstitch. Stitch through it, and then just cut your thread. Okay, so since I used that white thread or off-white thread, you can see how I stitched that angle through the corner. Now, one of the things that's so great about that is look what that does. When we have to fold up this next corner, and we're going to fold it up and then bring it immediately back down. But see what happens there? Where I stitched off at a 45-degree
Perfect
angle
45.
forms the basis for your 45-degree mitered fold. So right there, you're already being more accurate. Now we're just going to bring it back down, and I'm going to bring it to the needle to do that since I'm not using pins. I'm just going to continue down the next side. And this is where I do backstitch.
Oh, you are going to backstitch
yeah,
on this?
I do. I don't know why. I guess I don't think it matters, but I just do out of habit. And now I'm just going to race through this. Okay, so now I'm getting to the bottom of that side, and I'm going to stop. You just eyeball this, about 3/8 of an inch or whatever my seam allowance is. I remove the seam guide, I pivot again,
And
I
this
just
is where you
stitch.
don't backstitch, right?
Right, do not backstitch this, that's very important. And then just cut your thread. Okay, so one more time, we'll show this corner. We're just going to fold up right along that 45-degree stitching line, and then immediately fold back
Yeah,
down.
and that's what I was doing differently, and I can
Really?
see this is going to make it much neater and cleaner.
Great. And then we just go back to the needle, and we're going to stitch, treating every corner the exact same way.
And a little back stitch on this,
Little
right?
back stitch
Little bit?
when we begin each side. Okay, and here we are on the last corner. And I'm not going to sew very far down this side. Just go ahead and cut there, because then we need to join our beginning to our end. And we'll do that first here. And the easiest way to do this, the way that I had to learn it, was to always look at it the same way. And so I've got it facing me the way that I work, and I'm just going to arbitrarily decide, okay, this is where my seam is going to be. So I'm going to cut straight across there. And then I bring the beginning, or actually the end, the tail end of the binding across and over where I began. And that little piece that I just cut off becomes my ruler.
Oh.
And I just lay it. You can see here, there's where I began. And I'm just going to lay that as a ruler to let me know, because I have to cut 2 1/4 inches from the beginning
how easy.
on the end of the tail. So I'm just going to cut right there. I'll just do that real quickly. Cut straight across. Okay? So now I just have to join those 2 pieces, and we're joining them just like we join any 2 pieces of binding fabric with a 45-degree seam.
So just
at
like
a
we
right
did
angle.
at the beginning.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now I started sewing probably a little sooner than I would have, so I'm just going to pull back. These will easily remove, and that'll give us a little more of a tail to work with.
Yeah, there's really no point in trying to do it with too small of a piece.
Right, exactly. And this is the part that's a little bit tricky, and I'm not going to put any pins in this, because when I do that, then I've got to work with those pins, and you'll see that it gets to be very tight, and we don't want to be scraping ourselves with pins. So we're going to pick up, this is the beginning of the binding. We're going to pick that up and open it up, and you take the right side of the fabric, and it's going to be face down. On this side, the end of the binding, we're going to open it up, and it's face up. Okay, so you want to place your fabrics face up or right side up. And the reason for that is I'm going to lay one on top of the other, just like we're piecing binding strips, you know, at the beginning of our binding. And I'm going to lay that on top of it at a right angle. See that? Just like we were going to piece binding strips together.
Now this time we don't pull a little extra.
No,
right, we're
no.
just going to keep it
line
right.
them up
line
perfectly,
it up. Okay.
yeah, at a perfect right angle. You can see that. And then I'm going to take it to the machine without pins in it again, so it's a little tricky, but I think the pins are going to be in the way, and, you won't be able to see. So I'm just going to sew a diagonal seam from this corner to this corner, just like I'm piecing binding strips. And once you've done this many times, the pins really are not necessary.
No, and it's so easy to eyeball that end.
Oh, sure.
And get a nice straight
line. Oh, sure.
line.
Yeah, you can easily stitch. You can see where I'm going to go there. And I do back stitch a little bit there and cut my thread.
And you back stitched at the beginning of it a little bit?
I did. Okay. Now you can see, without even doing anything, that's going to fit.
Wow.
You can tell. And the only thing left to do on that then is to just, we're going to remove our seam allowance and make that just a nice, this is how you get rid of the bulk. You know, just cut it down to be a regular
just that quarter inch
seam. Exactly. And we're also going to press that open, and you can just finger press at this point to make sure that it's opened, and then fold your binding in half, just like the rest of the binding.
Oh, how easy is that?
Exactly. And then...
And that fits beautifully.
Right, and then we just complete the sewing down that side. Now again, I wouldn't normally be using this color thread, but this way viewers can see what's going on there. And there's a tiny little pucker there. I may have cut it just a bit long, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to show.
Be on the back.
That's exactly right. So then we'll just show how, you know, we fold that back. And there's our seam, just like any other seam in the binding. So it's a nice, neat,
and smooth.
lump-free.
Nice and smooth.
But that's not the best part of what I can teach you about doing these binding. It's the corner. And I want to show this quickly.
I don't know if I can take any more excitement, Patrick.
Well, I don't know that it's the most exciting, but it is sort of a aha moment in binding, that I can take 2 layers of the fabric out of this binding so that they're just completely removed, and it makes it lump-free. On every one of these corners that I stitched out through the point, you know, through the right angle at a 45-degree angle.
Right, with no back stitching.
No back stitching, and that's important. That makes it easier. And what I need to do is just pull the binding away from the quilt and expose that corner where I did that stitching through the corner.
And that's the top of the quilt right there, right?
Yeah, right at, there's my fold line.
Okay.
Okay, and I need to bring my scissors in front of, let's see if I can show that. Okay, so there's...
Oh, that's the little stitching line.
That's where I stitched. Okay. I'm just going to put the point on my scissors, and these Havel scissors have a great sharp point on them. and I'm going to put it right in all the way to the seam allowance and along the fold, and I'm just going to cut that fold all the way to the seam allowance. Now see what that did?
Oh.
That just freed up a wedge.
All of those layers.
And yeah, so now you can see where I stitched off. The reason that it was important not to stitch or back stitch at the corner is now I can just take the point of my scissors and just do a little pull there to remove those stitches, okay? And then I pull the quilt away from the binding. And do you see that wedge that's left? That's 2 layers of fabric that are doing nothing for your binding corner. And so what we're going to do is just clip those 2 layers away.
And that maintains the integrity of your quilt corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we've stitched beyond that. There's a stitching line there that's keeping that from going any further. All right, so at this point, all we have to do is fold the binding to the other side of the quilt, and you're going to see how easy that is to make a perfect 45-degree angle miter. I'm just going to fold.
Now the thickness has gone one direction. You don't even have to think about it, do you?
Well, it's also, now you can see what's been created here. So I've got another 45-degree angle fold that's just going to go to the other side.
Right to the back.
So right there, I've got, that's a perfect miter. I mean, and there was no work to that.
Oh, wow, look at that.
And then see how it matches on the back then.
Just perfect.
It's the exact same thing. And what I want you to do is actually, now the viewers can't do this, but run your fingers along the binding and then to the corner. Do you feel any more thickness in the corner? That's because
it's amazing.
These 2 folds are opposite of each other, in opposition, and they just lay interlocked together. So
just as if you're locking your seams together on a corner.
Exactly. And so I've removed 2 layers of fabric from that corner that makes a lump-free binding.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you. This may be hard for viewers to see on camera. It's kind of tricky to catch, but you can always refer to Quilting Celebrations magazine. We put the basics section in the back of the magazine, has a lot of my tips for binding and satin stitching and all of that kind of stuff.
That's nice to have it right there every time.
At your fingertips.
Yep.
So you think you got that?
I think so.
You think you can do it on your own now? That's the test.
I can.
Well, great. I'm sure you can.
I'll have you sitting on my shoulder.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can do it, and I'm sure you guys can too. In the next segment, though, we're going to do bias cut binding. And that's a little trickier, but I can show you some tricks for that also in our next segment. Quilting Celebrations with Patrick Lose is brought to you by The Warm Company, manufacturers of the most loved battings and double-stick fusibles for creative people. Janome, what's next? Superior Threads, all your favorite threads. Havel's Sewing, cut it close with Havel's Sewing. And Patrick Lose Studios, designs and inspirations for your quilting celebrations.